All right, give some people some time to jump on, but I'm very excited. Today we're going to be talking about what I think is probably my very favorite topic, which is Epstein-Barr virus. So that will be fun. Let me just give everyone a second to jump on. So if you know somebody who is struggling with Epstein-Barr virus or you think might be, go ahead and tag them so that they can be here for this information as well. We are going to cover a lot. Now, in preparation for this talk, I realized there's probably going to be more information than I can get into in just one segment for sure. So I plan to do some follow-ups. So if I don't get to everything today, feel free to ask me questions. I think I'm going to do much more regular information about Epstein-Barr virus just because there is so much out there. And every time I post about it, it seems to be the thing that people have the most interest in. And it's such a huge part of my story that I feel like it needs to be shared more resources, more information about it. So if I don't get to some of those questions or there's unanswered questions, I promise I'll come back and do more information about that too. But let's start I want to start today with kind of Epstein-Barr 101. What is it? How do you get it? What does it do to your body? I think there's even a lot of misconceptions about just the virus in general, let alone all the health conditions that it's connected to. And then I want to share my story with you because I think a lot of people resonate with the things I went through on my journey to even find out that I had chronic Epstein-Barr virus. And hopefully that will help somebody out there who might be struggling with symptoms that they don't know what it's coming from. And then we'll see how much time we have left if we can get into some of the co-infections and other things. If not, I will come back and do some more detailed deep dives into that as well. So let's start number one with just what is Epstein-Barr virus? So in its acute form, Epstein-Barr virus is the virus that causes mono. However, it's not really the mono that causes all of these chronic issues that we're going to talk about today. That is the first time you have it. That's that acute flare. When you have mono, you have the sore throat, you have the swollen lymph nodes, swollen glands, but that's not always the presentation of chronic Epstein-Barr virus. So having mono once means you've been exposed to the virus. Now, here's something that's interesting because this is a big part of my story, and I hear people say it all the time when I'm suspicious that maybe Epstein-Barr virus is a cause for somebody. Oftentimes, people will tell me, but I've never had mono. Well, you've never been tested for mono when it was positive. I myself had never been diagnosed with mono ever and have a very major case of chronic Epstein-Barr. And here's why. So a lot of times, and Epstein-Barr virus is known to have co-infections with lots of different pathogens, but one of the main ones is strep bacteria. So the acute form of mono and strep throat sound and feel very similar. And the problem is a lot of times they co-infect or they infect at the same time. So what most of the time happens is you go to the doctor, you don't feel good, your throat is sore, you're tired, you're fatigued, you have a headache, like all the same things that would go along with strep throat. And because to diagnose strep, it's a quick swab where Epstein-Barr has to be a blood test. A lot of times people will just get tested, and if it comes back positive for strep, there we go, that's what it is. And they don't test any farther. So you didn't get the blood draw to see if it was Epstein-Barr. You didn't know if you had mono. And some of the time, if not more often than not, you probably did have Epstein-Barr at the same time as those strep bacteria infections. You just weren't tested for it. So one of the red flags I ask people is, have you had consistent or chronic strep throat or strep bacteria in general, which includes strep B, if you've had, vaginal swabs when you're having your kids, if you've had other strep infections, if you've had consistent or chronic strep infections or multiple, even as a child, right then, immediately I'm thinking, okay, we most likely are also dealing with some Epstein-Barr. So the first kind of miscommunication I want to clear up is just because you've never been diagnosed with mono before does not rule out the potential that you have a chronic Epstein-Barr virus. I had never been diagnosed. I never knew. It was one of the reasons it wasn't on my radar at first because I just had never had to deal with that I knew of. And then lo and behold, I do my Epstein-Barr labs and they're crazy. So just because you didn't have mono doesn't mean, or didn't have a diagnosed case of mono, doesn't mean you don't have chronic Epstein-Barr, but that is the first presentation, right? In that acute phase, it is mono. However, the complication with Epstein-Barr, different than a lot of viruses, is that it is in that herpes family of viruses. which just like cold sores, just like general herpes, these are things that you typically have lifelong. That's what makes Epstein-Barr more problematic than, say, like the flu virus or any other illnesses that you might be exposed to, because it does have the characteristic of staying in your body. Now, another miscommunication is you'll hear a lot of doctors say, yeah, well, like 90% of the population have been exposed to Epstein-Barr. That doesn't mean anything, right? Like almost everybody has it. I hear that comment a lot. And even though that's true, most people get exposed to it. There are two very different camps of what happens after you get exposed to Epstein-Barr for the first time. So person number one, let's say this is my husband. This is our exact situation, right? My husband, who's been pretty healthy most of his life, doesn't have chronic health issues, doesn't have some of the things that I'm going to tell you about my story. He can get Epstein-Barr once, right? He can have mono. He can fully recover from it. It can go dormant in the body. His body can take care of it exactly the way that it's supposed to, and it can never reactivate. It can never cause problems. It can stay dormant in his cells, and it never becomes an issue his whole entire life. Doesn't get chronic Epstein-Barr, doesn't get symptoms from it. Great. Most people, that is the situation. And then you have people like, if you're watching this, probably you and I, where I had a lot of other inflammations, I had gut infections, I had other things going on. So my first exposure to Epstein-Barr stayed in my body. But because of the things that tend to reactivate Epstein-Barr, which the most common ones are other infections, viral, bacterial, yeast, parasites, any additional infection is known to reactivate Epstein-Barr. Stress, I've had a very stressful life, right? There's people who just tend to have more stress in their life. There's a lot of things going on through my childhood. There's a lot of trauma in my life. Those stressors and those traumas are also known to reactivate Epstein-Barr. Hormone fluctuations. There's a reason why postpartum, after pregnancies, after menopause, during perimenopause, these are the times we tend to see autoimmune and immune issues flare, because those big hormone fluctuations can also reactivate or make more of a chronic Epstein-Barr infection. And myself, just like most of the women that I work with, had all of the above, right? I had the co-infections, I had the stress, I had the hormone fluctuations through pregnancies and through cycling and through going on and off birth control, all the things that damage our hormones. I did when I was younger because I didn't know any better, which makes me the perfect candidate for a chronic reactivated Epstein-Barr virus, right? So unfortunately for me, it wasn't just a one-time exposure and it's no big deal. It became a very big deal in my body because of what I call the viral load. The heavier the load of the virus is on your body, the more it's actually going to cause symptoms and problems long-term. And no, that doesn't happen for everybody, right? Just because you have positive titers does not mean you're going to have chronic illness. But there are a lot of other factors that play into the people who do end up with those chronic problems. And that's more what I want to address today. So next up is, how do you properly test for Epstein-Barr? This is probably the least well-managed piece of Epstein-Barr when it comes to the medical community, because not only do they rarely test enough markers, but they'll also, for the most part, just tell you it's a past infection, which might not be true. So if you have Epstein-Barr labs, if you've been tested, I encourage you to pull them out, look at them, kind of follow along, and see what you've been tested for, see what you're missing, because I really think this is a missing piece. Very few people are tested properly, and also the test has to be interpreted properly, right? You can have two different people look at this test, and one person will say, no big deal, past infection, don't worry about it ever again. And then someone who is really literate in Epstein-Barr will say, holy crap, that's a big viral load that very well could be your root cause that's stimulating all of these other problems. So not only making sure you're getting the right titers tested, but make sure the right person is reading those labs for you, because you can also go with a misdiagnosis for years if you don't have somebody really looking at these numbers. So when it comes to Epstein-Barr, there are 4 different antibodies. It's a blood test. And let me know in the comments, have you been tested for Epstein-Barr? If any of this sounds familiar, I'd love to hear kind of what your experience has been too. So there are 4 different titers that you have to test for Epstein-Barr through a blood test. One of them is called your IgM, I think M for mono. That's the one when you're in an acute infection, you have mono, likely the first time, or maybe you've been re-exposed to it. that one's really only positive when you have mono. So for people who come to me for chronic Epstein-Barr issues, that's rarely the one that's positive. Maybe 10% of the time I'll still see somebody in an IgM state, but that's typically your first exposure. For most people, it was earlier on in life, and then that one doesn't typically go positive again. But that is the one marker that most of your traditional medical doctors are looking for. They want to see, do you have mono? Because that's the form that they're good at treating, right? Or good at helping you with. So if you don't have the acute form of mono, kind of everything else is considered irrelevant medically, right? In traditional medicine, because there isn't a pill, there isn't a prescription, there isn't something they can give you for a chronic Epstein-Barr infection. So unless you're in the IgM mono state, there's not much that gets done. And maybe you've been in that position. They've tested your titers and they said, no, past infection, nothing's wrong. Yet you're kind of stuck with all the symptoms and you still feel bad. And you still feel like maybe in your heart, Epstein-Barr is part of the problem. It's likely that it is. So no Epstein-Barr. If we don't have IgM, we don't have mono, but we still have the last three titers that can tell us what phase of infection you're in. Is it chronic? Is it reactivated? And how large is your viral load? When I'm working with someone for chronic Epstein-Barr, it's actually those three markers that mean more to me than even the IgM. So the first one is called your VCA IgG. And I have other videos where I show some of these markers. I can post them in stories too, so you can see what they look like as well. But the VCA IgG is technically the titer for a past infection. That is the one that goes up as the acute virus goes away. That's your immune system responding to having been exposed to a virus in the past. That's true. However, the larger that number is, the more likely you've had viral reactivation and the heavier your viral load becomes. Because remember, a lot of the chronic issues associated with Epstein-Barr are from the chronic form and not the acute form, right? And we know that there is a ton of scientific literature. There's peer-reviewed articles, there's published studies that are linking Epstein-Barr to some very major conditions, including autoimmune disease, MS, multiple sclerosis, lupus, Hashimoto's is one of the big ones. There's true research linking the chronic, not the acute, not mono, chronic Epstein-Barr to these conditions. So most of the literature says if your VCA IgG is over 150, you're now in more of that chronic Epstein-Barr state. If it's under 150, now there are some people with a lower VCA IgG and they're still very symptomatic, so it doesn't rule you out from having symptoms if it's lower, but typically over 150, that's a heavy viral load. That is somebody who has more issues going on in their immune system and has likely reactivated or had a replication of the virus more often. So even though it's a past infection titer, and that's what you're going to be told, oh, that one's past infection, you're going to have it forever, no big deal. That's true, but we want to know where the numbers are because that will tell us where you're at as far as phases of chronic Epstein-Barr. So that one's very important, and that one will be read very differently, right, by two different types of healthcare practitioners. Holistically, we believe that over 150, it is causing chronic issues in your body, and medically, they believe it's just a past titer and it doesn't matter what the number is. So you're going to get two different sides of information for sure. And for me, I followed a lot of that side for a long time until I myself had to walk through healing from Epstein-Barr. And when I took it seriously was the first time I really had a big breakthrough in my health. So I firmly believe in the impact that chronic Epstein-Barr has. And one of my biggest titers was always that VCA IgG. And that's the one that I monitor for myself the most often. So there definitely is more information in just one marker than a past infection. The third ones, we said IgM, mono, VCA, IgG, past infection, or how heavy is your viral load. And then we have your nuclear antigen. This is also highly linked to autoimmune disease. When they do biopsies of certain tissues with autoimmune, like Hashimoto's, for example, the nuclear antigen for Epstein-Barr is typically the one that they find in the tissues of these autoimmune affected tissues, which means they got in that tissue and the body had to create an immune response to the Epstein-Barr virus. And that has really stimulated that autoimmune response. I'm going to do an entire live just on that, how Epstein-Barr creates autoimmunity, because it's really fascinating. But just in short, when they say your body is attacking itself, it's really not. Your body is attacking something. And in the case of Hashimoto's, in the case of MS, a lot of times it's the Epstein-Barr virus embedded in the cells, embedded in the nerve roots. It can even cross the blood-brain barrier. It can be embedded in the brain, which is why it can cause different depression and anxiety. And your body goes to war trying to fight off this virus or this viral load, and that creates the immune system response. So the nuclear antigen is the one that the higher that number is, the more it's actually inside those cells, the more it's creating abnormal cell replication, which tends to be why it's linked to so many other diseases and illnesses. So the nuclear antigen and the VCA IgG, those are really the two most common ones that I see positive and linked to chronic Epstein-Barr. And again, we want to see if they're positive, and then we want to see what those numbers are for how heavy the load is. Most of the time when you get tested, even from your general medical doctor, usually they test those 3 titers. The one that they almost never test, and I feel like this is a big problem, there's a 4th antigen called the early antigen. In fact, when I request blood work, it's actually a separate marker. You have to ask for the Epstein-Barr profile and then add on the early antigen, which is why I think a lot of doctors who aren't very familiar with Epstein-Barr just forget to add it on. So most people who send me their labs from some other place or their doctor, or maybe they got it tested from somebody else, usually it's missing the early antigen, which is the make or break, because the early antigen tells us if you are currently in a reactivation, which protocol-wise changes decision-making a lot. If you're just in the chronic form versus in a true reactivation, there's 2 very different ways that you want to approach that. So having the early antigen will make a very big difference, and it lets you know not only are you in an activation now, but have you been in one sometime in the last 3 to 6 months? Because that antigen really only stays positive in the body for around 3 months after a reactivation. So you get so much information from that marker, and it is the one typically linked to the most symptomatic people who are having the worst symptoms. Yet rarely do I see that tested. So when you're asking for testing, and if you want help with testing, send me a message, put a comment. We can send you the requisitions. You can go to a LabCorp. You get these drawn from anywhere. You don't have to get them from your general practitioner if they're unwilling, or if you're not positive that they know how to read them properly. If you want help getting proper testing, give me a comment. I'll post some links after I'm done as well, so you have those. But making sure that you're getting all 4 of those titers is huge, and making sure you're interpreting them properly so that you're getting the right information. So let me know if you need help getting that testing. But that's big. Most people don't even get tested properly. So you might think it's Epstein-Barr, you might not be positive, but there's ways to know, right? You don't have to live in this unknown mystery. Test. Let's see what's going on. Let's see if this is your root cause. Because for me, if I would have never tested, I would have never even thought that this could be what was going on with my body. So that brings me to, you want some testing? Yes, perfect. I'll get with you on that too. Questions about that? I know that's a lot already, a lot of information. Questions, does that happen to you? Have you gone and they got testing, they just said it's a past infection? Have you been told it's not necessary to test? That happens a lot too. Oh, there's no reason to test because there's nothing we can do about it. I hear that a lot. Tell me if that's your experience. What's been going on with your investigation into Epstein-Barr? I'm always curious to know what's happening with people, because for me, I'm going to give you a lot of detail about my story because I think it's important that you guys can resonate with some of these things. So I feel like for me, I've been symptomatic most of my life. I really think I probably got exposed. And again, this is just me looking back on timelines. I think I got exposed to Epstein-Barr for the first time when I was about 8 years old, because that's the first time I can clearly pinpoint a decline in my health. And then it just never really got better from there. So my interpretation of this is I probably had mono around 8. My mom said I had multiple, times I would have strep throat. We got treated with antibiotics for strep bacteria, never got tested for mono. So again, I'm pretty sure we co-infected strep bacteria and mono. And that's when my digestive issues, my migraine headaches, and my psoriasis really started. And again, externally, couldn't really pinpoint any reason for that. Doctors just said idiopathic, all of these things. But looking back, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. For me, it started young. For some of you, it doesn't. For some of you, it starts in your 20s or 30s or 40s or post-menopause. But for me, it's been almost my whole life. I had, again, migraine headaches. It started with eczema. I had stomach issues. And then as we go through, remember I talked about the stressors, as I went through additional stressors in my life, it kept getting worse and worse and worse. And now, knowing what I know, every time that happened, I had a reactivation. My viral load got heavier. My chronic Epstein-Barr got worse, which each new thing that happened, right? So around 12 or 13, starting my period, a big hormone fluctuation, that's when I started getting more joint pain. And then stress through school. My parents had a pretty messy divorce. All of that stress. From there, I started getting terrible digestive issues, bloating so bad I couldn't tolerate it. We tried everything, like diet changes. I was eating healthy. I was taking all of these supplements. Nothing was helping. That's kind of mid-teen years, going into college, going into my undergrad, like just stress beyond stress beyond stress. I started getting such debilitating joint pain. I was getting nauseous. I could barely eat. All these things just kept compiling. But every time I would go to a doctor, guess what they would tell me? Normal, tests are normal, labs look great, you're fine, right? Like my TSH was fine, my blood sugar was fine. All of the big things were fine. So I'm going on already 10 or 15 years at this point, suffering, like really struggling with some very major health issues. And not a single person could give me an answer, not a single doctor. In fact, even after I went and got all of my education, I still didn't know any of this. I was almost 30 years old. I was already graduated. I was already a doctor before I found out I had Epstein-Barr virus because it's so poorly managed. Nobody else up to that point even thought to check me for chronic Epstein-Barr, which honestly kind of makes me a little bit mad now. Like I think of how many years I could have saved struggling if I would have known this earlier. But nobody even mentioned that should be something that I would check. And for me, so again, I had symptoms most of my life, right? But it really came to a head after the birth of my son, who's 10. So 10 years ago, I had my son, and within weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks after him being born, I had a full hormone crash. And remember, hormone fluctuations are one of the big things that are going to stimulate a reactivation of your Epstein-Barr. At that point, my joint pain got so bad, I could not close my hands. I couldn't pick my newborn baby up and hold him. My hands hurt so bad. I was in bed easily 12 hours a day, but still felt exhausted. Even though I was in bed, I couldn't sleep. So I had insomnia mixed with like exhaustion at the same time, which is miserable. And just feeling truly like my body was shutting down. Like there were days I really felt like this could be the end, like something's seriously wrong and I just don't know what it is yet. We did all the tests. I checked for all the things. Everything was negative, right? It wasn't cancer. It wasn't, a tumor. It wasn't any of the big things, which thank God it wasn't. But tell me if you've ever felt like this. Every test that came back negative, I lost a little bit more hope. Like at that point, I just wanted something to be positive, right? I was like, I want you to find something so I at least know what to do about it. The more things kept coming back normal, the more discouraged I would get about the situation. And I remember the first time, I was 29 years old when I first tested my Epstein-Barr virus and it came back positive. And I had just read several articles. I was kind of doing my own research. I was trying to figure out what was going on with this. And a lot of what I was reading about Epstein-Barr, I was like, that really sounds like me. Like, I really feel like this could be it. And when I got my testing back and I opened it, I just started crying. And not even because I was mad, I was relieved. Like it was the first thing that I saw that made sense for why my body was doing what it was doing, right? But prior to that, nothing else made sense to me and nothing else had really worked, right? I wasn't feeling any better. So I opened it up and I just bawled. I was so relieved. And then from there, I always say I became like an accidental Epstein-Barr expert. I went deep down the rabbit hole. I wanted to learn everything about it. I wanted to know how to fix it. I wanted to figure out what to do about it. And that's when I really became aware that the information publicly out there about Epstein-Barr is terrible, right? It's awful. If you Google Epstein-Barr right now, especially chronic Epstein-Barr, you're going to get two very polarizing opinions and both of them suck. You're either going to get, it's no big deal, everyone has it, or you're going to get doom and gloom, which is like it causes all these cancers, you might need blood transfusions, and you could possibly die from it. So either it's nothing and you don't have to worry about it, or you're probably going to die from it. Neither of those are the right answer, right? There's a middle ground where we take this very seriously. I take it very seriously, but I fully believe there's hope. And that doesn't necessarily mean there's a cure, right? I get that question a lot. It's like, well, is there a cure for chronic Epstein-Barr virus? And remember, you've been exposed to a virus. The virus is in your body. The goal is not necessarily to fully eradicate the virus because that's likely impossible, right? We don't have that mechanism yet. Maybe one day in the future we will, but we don't yet. However, I fully believe with every ounce of my body that you can be a healthy, perfectly well-functioning person with a chronic Epstein-Barr virus if you know how to properly manage it, right? We've got to make sure that we're properly managing the situation because just like the example I shared, my husband can have Epstein-Barr and he has no problems, and then I can have Epstein-Barr and I have a million problems. It's health of the host, right? That is the best term I want you to understand and really just internalize. The healthier you are, the less we're worried about the virus, okay? Which means when it comes to curing, and again, there's no cure, but I'm just using that word because it's what most people ask. When it comes to how to fix chronic Epstein-Barr virus, it cannot stop at just weakening the virus. And unfortunately, again, most of the information out there is just about trying to deactivate the virus and weaken it enough that it doesn't reactivate, which is important. However, I fully believe from my own journey and the thousands of women I've helped walk through Epstein-Barr, we have to deactivate it first, right? I have a wonderful Epstein-Barr bundle. If you've never seen it, it's a great antiviral bundle. It's the best first step. It helps you weaken the virus. It helps support your immune system. It's the perfect first step, but it is not the cure-all. It is not the fix for everything. I wish it was, right? That would make life so much easier. It's a great first step, which is weaken the virus and support the immune system. However, once the virus is weakened, the real magic, the real fix comes when you then strengthen and correct all of the adaptations, all of the changes that have had to happen in your body because of a chronic viral load. So let me explain my story to kind of clarify what that means. So for me, because I had this heavy weight of a viral load, and I see lots of questions, I'll come back in just a second. I had this heavy weight of a viral load my whole life. Because of that, it created an abnormal immune response, lots of inflammation, and over time, it made these other problems, which also came with other symptoms. So for me, for example, and again, your story might be totally different than mine. Your causes might be different. I've never had an Epstein-Barr case that's exactly the same. That's the beauty of it, right? Everyone's body will adapt differently. But just so you can have an idea, mine, it started with the first exposure to Epstein-Barr. And then things I also didn't know, I had a co-infection of H. pylori in the gut, which continued to reactivate my Epstein-Barr. So for a lot of people, there's something going on in the gut and the gut microbiome. So once we've weakened the virus, we want to work on really making sure that there's no other co-infections. Is there anything else that will continue to reactivate the virus? Because we know that Epstein-Barr tends to co-infect with bacteria, with Lyme, with strep, with candida, with different parasites. And again, you don't necessarily have to have all of those. We need to find the one or two you might have so that we're no longer allowing those things to keep reactivating the Epstein-Barr, right? So the gut and the gut microbiome, including co-infections, anything else that might be triggering your Epstein-Barr, that becomes the next step. And don't get overwhelmed by any of this. It doesn't mean you have to go do all of these things right now. I just want you to see that there's hope, there's a progression, but it's more than just taking a couple of supplements for Epstein-Barr. So if you've tried a few things in the past and didn't feel like it worked, or you don't feel tremendously better, I often find that you've just forgotten or didn't know that these next steps had to happen, right? So yes, weaken the virus, but gut and co-infections. And then a biggie where I really feel like a lot of like the magic happens is rebalancing your adrenals and your hormones. The stress of a chronic virus creates massive shift in your hormones and your adrenals, and it can be in both directions. For me, they depleted, they tanked. My adrenals tanked, my progesterone tanked, my estrogen tanked, which at that phase of my life was part of why I was having such bad fatigue and anxiety. Yes, it was part of the virus, but it was also part because the virus sucked all my hormones out and I was exhausted. So let's say, for example, I just deactivated the virus, but I never addressed my adrenals and my hormones. Would I have got better? Probably not, right? So I think you're just missing other pieces. The virus is a big part of it, but the adaptations are why you're still feeling so bad. So for me, that was my next big shift where I started to feel better. My adrenals started to turn back on, and I gave myself some great, natural hormone support. All of a sudden I started feeling alive again, right? Like a human again. I could function. I was sleeping, like feeling like I finally had some energy back, working on that hormone and adrenal piece. After that, there's another piece, right? The Epstein-Barr virus gets stuck in your cells. It gets stuck deep inside of those cells. So we do want to do some type of cell detox. We do want to do a detox. However, it's never, look at that. Someone just asked about detox. Perfect timing. I never start on a detox. Never. You're not ready for it. Your body's not ready for it. If you try and rush to the biggest, hardest step, your body's going to crash, right? There is a mechanism behind this. There is just a method that needs to be followed, which for some people feels slow, feels methodical. But if you really want long-term results, you've got to make sure you're dealing with all the different adaptations in the right order. You can't rush. Everyone always wants to detox and lose weight. That's every woman I work with pretty much is like, I just want it out of my body and I want to lose weight. Guess what? Those two things can't happen until we really do the foundational work over here, right? Like I understand it's tempting to want to have all of those things right away, but if you don't deal with the virus, the co-infections, if you don't get your endocrine system, your adrenals, your hormones right, your body's not going to be able to metabolize fat. You're not going to be able to properly detox. You earn, right, to get to that point. But yes, detox is important. We want to pull it out of the cells. We want to get as much other toxicity, inflammation, things out of the body that could, again, create the imbalances. So that comes over time. And again, when I detox, I got another layer. That's finally when my skin cleared up. So I feel like with each piece, another part of my story got better, right? So the first thing to go away was my joint pain and my headaches. And then when I dealt with my adrenals and my hormones, my energy really came back. And then when I detoxed, my skin got better. And then after detoxing, it's time to flood the body back with good stuff. Because guess what? Killing viruses and detoxing can deplete your system. It's normal. It happens. You just have to have the next step, right? What do you do after that? Flood the body back with good stuff. That's where I really felt like it went from just feeling bad all the time to finally feeling good was after detox, when I got to flood my body with good stuff. So understanding that when it comes to Epstein-Barr, there's not a cure, but there is definitely a process, right? There is hope. No cure, but there's hope. And it's just knowing those pieces to walk through. And again, I don't want you to get overwhelmed by that information. Wherever you're at, start there. So the simplest place, if you've never been properly tested for Epstein-Barr, that's step one. If you get testing from me, the Epstein-Barr test, the cost of the test includes your test review appointment with one of my doctors. They'll review it with you. They'll explain what your best next steps will be because that's different for everybody. So if you have no idea where to start and you've not been tested for Epstein-Barr, start there. That's the perfect place to start. If you have been tested and you haven't really done anything with that information yet, then I highly encourage you to start the Epstein-Barr protocol, right? The bundles to weaken the virus. That's step one. If you've done nothing with that information, you know you have it, but you haven't really done anything to start correcting it, great. Start working on the immune system. That's the perfect next step. If you're the person who's done those, maybe you've tried to do some Epstein-Barr work, you have your testing, and you really feel like you have a lot of adaptations, right? Other symptoms. If you're like, man, I know I probably have co-infections. I feel like my adrenals are tanked, or I know that my hormones are out of whack. If you're that person and you're really ready to like get more in depth on this Epstein-Barr healing, I think the best thing to do is schedule a consultation with one of my doctors, our initial consultation, because I know people have so many questions. We do it for $49. It's not a huge investment, but it is the best place for you to get individualized recommendations on what should you test next? What is your next step? Do we need to do a gut test? Do we need to do a hormone test? Do we need to look at, toxicity stuff? Because everyone's history will be a little bit different. So if you're the person who really wants some like detailed answers, scheduling that consultation is your best place. All my doctors are very educated on Epstein-Barr. That's what we do, right? Most of the women we work with have chronic Epstein-Barr. But that would be a great place if you're ready for more. But any of those places are the perfect place to start, right? And then when you get one piece under control, then you can move on to the other ones. The last thing I want you to do is have paralysis by analysis and do nothing. Pick one step and start there. You're either getting some testing, or you're going to start weakening the virus with some really good herbal supplements. Or if you're ready to do the deeper dive, then you do the consultation. But there's a place for everybody. There's also, I have free master classes. I have tons of free education. So if you're not even ready to take that step and you just want to learn more, I have hours and hours worth of Epstein-Barr content. And again, I'm going to keep coming back over the next couple of weeks and diving deeper. I want to talk about things, chronic health issues that are connected to Epstein-Barr. I want to talk about what you do if you're in a flare for Epstein-Barr, if you're in a reactivation after your initial treatments. I want to talk about signs and symptoms that you can look for in yourself and in your kids. There's so much to dive into. I'm going to keep coming back and doing that. But in the last couple minutes, I just want to go through and answer any questions here. Had a test years ago. It shows I was positive. Not sure what that test was. Diagnosed with MS in 2011. Hashimoto symptoms. I mean, there is very well documented information that chronic Epstein-Barr and MS are highly linked. That is one of the ones that is the most well recognized across all camps of medical, points of view, is that MS and Epstein-Barr are definitely connected. And then typically they'll say if you have one autoimmune, you usually end up with more than one. And it's not because your immune system sucks, it's because whatever triggered it, for example, Epstein-Barr, is still in there. So now it's not just in your nerve roots, now it's in your thyroid too, hence the Hashimoto symptoms. I would reevaluate that. If your test has been years ago, you probably just want to get some new titers, see where they're at. Are you reactivated? What level are they at right now? I think getting some new EBV testing would be a great first step, and then deciding a plan from there. My capsid IgG says 2.7. Are the units different for my test? I would have to see the actual test. Sometimes they are, do you have the other 3 tested? Was that the only one tested? There's kind of a lot of missing information in that question. You can feel free to put a comment down here or send me a message if you want to talk about that further. Terrible joint pain. That was my 100%. The joint pain is one of the things when I have an Epstein-Barr flare or reactivation, it's always my hands, my joint pain. That's a telltale sign for me that it's Epstein-Barr. Symptoms sound like yours. I'm sorry to hear that, but if I got better, you can get better. That's the moral of the story. Can this be caused by mold toxicity and not being able to detox? So that's the problem, right? So it's not caused by mold toxicity, right? I fully believe Epstein-Barr or chronic infections in general are the true root cause, but because now you get exposed to other mycotoxins, they bog down your liver. Likely you have some, pathway issues that aren't helping you detox. All of that comes together and it allows more reactivations in your Epstein-Barr. So your case tends to be more severe, but I don't believe it's caused by mold toxicity. It's exacerbated from the mold. Usually the Epstein-Barr came first. The mold made it worse in most cases. Great questions. Love it. Okay, I will come back and post any links or things that I need to get to you guys that we talked about today. If you have more questions, specific questions about Epstein-Barr, I would love for you to come back and put those questions in the comments so I can cover them next week. Anything else that you want to learn, anything you're curious about, something you've heard that you're wondering if it's relevant or not, I would be happy to answer any of those questions. So I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me today. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you got a lot of great information. And then I'll come back after there's several more questions over on Instagram and different places too. So I'm going to come back and try and get to as many of those as possible. If I don't, always feel free to send me a DM, send me a message if I don't get to your question. Sometimes you just jump in my DMs and it's easier for me to see those. So thank you guys so much and we'll see you soon.